Welcome to today's Emory Career Webinar, Make Room to Grow, Overcoming the Production Trap. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. My name is Sarah Rawls, Director of Alumni Learning and Professional Development Programs at the Office of Alumni Engagement. And I'm thrilled to be here today with Jodie Charlop, an Oxford College and Emory College graduate, and now Managing Partner at Acceleration Partners. Jodie was instrumental in creating the career services offered at the Emory Alumni Association and is one of our partner coaches, so it is always a pleasure to have her on the line with us. Over the past few years, Jodie has partnered with the Emory Alumni Association on a series of in-person events through our Alumni Leadership Circle, which aims to bring together women in the middle and executive phases of their professional development journeys. We realize that in-person events are not always the best way for everyone to connect, so we are pleased to bring you a three-part webinar series this spring to touch on themes that continue to arise in our Alumni Leadership Circle conversations. After this webinar, Jodie will be talking about overcoming the double bind and casting your leadership vision. If you need to step out at any point during this presentation, know that the webinar is being recorded, and I will email you access to that recording in the next 2 business days, along with information on the next 2 sessions. We have a webinar archive with over 100 past presentations, so I will also send that to you to check out. And specifically within that YouTube channel, we have an Alumni Leadership Circle playlist of relevant webinars for you. At the very end of today's presentation, we will take your questions, so thank you for sending in questions in advance of the session, and please feel free to send in questions in the question area on the GoToWebinar control panel as they arise. And without further ado, let me tell you a bit more about our presenter. With more than 25 years of experience in corporate and professional service settings, along with advanced study in psychology and human behavior, Jodie Charlop's coaching and consulting experience spans Fortune 500 and high-growth public companies, pre-IPO startup ventures, professional services, government agency, and educational institutions. Jodie's real-world business experience includes holding senior and executive-level roles in professional services and tech firms in both Atlanta and Silicon Valley. As founder of Potential Matters, Inc., Jodie built a thriving private coaching practice, helping professionals build career resiliency and successfully evolve to positions of leadership. And many of those clients have been Emory, so we love that. She has served as a guest coach at the Goizueta Business School, Executive Education Program at Emory, and adjunct faculty at the University of Georgia. And she is, as I said, one of our partner coaches at the Office of Alumni Engagement. So, Jodie, thank you very much for being here. I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for the continued great work you're doing in bringing programming to our alums. And I'm just delighted to be here in January 2019, ready to kick off the year and talk to some of my great colleagues about the production trap and making room to grow. Obviously, the first of the year is always a good time because new year, new you, we really think about these activities at this time of year. This topic in particular is one of my favorite topics because I guess you teach what you need to learn. I'm in coaching myself after 30 years in business because, as we know, they don't make any more time, and time is our most precious resource. And no matter how we want or what we look at it, time is like an airline seat. When it flies, it's gone. And so really thinking through our time and what we want to do with our time, and also really for women who are on the path to leadership, want to lead, want to grow, want to have more leadership in their life. It's just a really important issue to really think about. A lot of times, as I think about the women that I'm coaching, women want to lead. Women have great gifts to lead. We just need to create space to lead. And by the way, this is not just a woman's issue, although there are some really special things I think that women do to take it to an Uber level. And it's an issue I talk about with all leaders, all executives. If you're too busy to lead, then there's a challenge for you to be viewed in terms of a leader. And there's a paradox. We're being pulled in every direction. We need more time and more resources, but we don't have more time and resources. So the only thing we can begin to control is how we begin to think about our workflow, our work and life, and begin to think strategically and consciously about what we can do best with that 168 hours we have every week. So I hope today is really going to be about mental models and really thinking about how we think about time and some of the things that we can do to shift our mindset as we move forward. So I think what's happening in the workplace, just to kind of tee up some context, I mean, we all know that we're living in a more volatile, ambiguous, chaotic world, and there's more coming at us from every place, whether you're working for a global company or an emerging growth company. There's just more coming at us than ever before. Technological change, social change, business change. I don't think I can work in any corporation across Atlanta, across the up the eastern seaboard, or even globally, that's not going through some sort of change and transformation. So change and volatility is constant. And with that, we have so much coming at us. And again, as I think about it, this is not just a male or female issue. I mean, just a female issue, because my practice is really representative of men and women, and probably more representative of the, particularly in my executive practice, because 85% of executives are men. I probably coach more male executives. But as I really think about my emerging leaders, both men and women, and particularly for women, I begin to see this kind of dialogue as we think about working harder and what leadership stands for. And I begin to listen to the conversations where oftentimes we are really working hard. And as we think about their leadership and their growth, and I begin to ask women whether they want to take a leadership role, what they're looking to do. A lot of times they're beginning to think about not taking on leadership work because they're equating it to more work in the workplace. And I have a very different perspective today, but there is sometimes a question in women's mind because they're equating leadership with more responsibility and work, like a pound of performance. And a lot of this comes from kind of our Western society, bootstrap mentality, work hard. If you work hard, you'll get ahead. And that's been drummed into us, as people, particularly in the Western world, for many years. If you work hard, you can do anything. If you work hard, you can be anything you want. And I think all of that's occurring in this backdrop of constrained resources and so much coming at us. But I've said to one of my coaching clients, because I've been coaching for 15 years, and she was a woman in technology, and we were talking about it, and she's like, I don't know if I really want to go into leadership. And I said, well, why? I said, she said, well, I don't really think I have the bandwidth, or I don't know if it's what I really want. I really want more work-life balance. And I always say, when you move into leadership and move out of the producer roles, you have more power and influence to begin to shift culture and begin to think about how you want to lead. And I always say, to my women, at least try and get to a place where you can be in a situation, because I look at this particular client that I worked with, and she's a phenomenal leader. And now we've had several years of kind of getting her up to a level, and now she's in a place, and I asked her the other day, I said, where are you in terms of your career satisfaction? And she said, I'm at a 10. And I said, well, what's different about it? And she said, you always told me, but that it would be good. But she's like, I've instituted more work-life balance. We've got more work from home. We're doing more development. She's growing her team and kind of creating the culture that she always wanted. And so I think it's just really an imperative for us as women to really pursue those types of leadership roles, because if we don't, we're not going to get the kind of environments and the kind of change that we're seeking, so we can have that balance, and not even the balance, but just that connectivity between our home, our work, our community, and candidly our world. So just really think about, as you think about your own path to leadership, it's just interesting because I see this mindset at play, and really think about what this all means from how we think about time, how we think about leadership, and it not being just more work, but just an opportunity to really think about it. Just to rehash, because I think it's really important, I think as we think of, and again, I think it's just really important as women, we look at kind of what's the reality that's facing us. I know I've been a woman in the workforce for over 3 decades. We make up nearly half of the workforce, and we're still seeing, that struggle to get to higher level leadership positions. In fact, over the past couple of years, and I've been doing this work with emerging women leaders, for going on 6 or 7 years, and actually the numbers are declining, in terms of just the number of female CEOs and at the highest levels, 16% at officer levels. I mean, as we look at senior leaders, 2 out of 3 men have children, 1 out of 3 women have children. I think women now I have seen an increase in women representing 11% of the top earner spots. We've seen some increase there. If you off-ramp for 2 years, and it's interesting because I read the just different things that come out. A lot of folks think we're off-ramping for children, but there is now more off-ramping for aging parents and other kinds of issues that are coming up that are really taking us off our traditional career trajectory sometimes. And I'm sad to say that when we off-ramp for these life issues, sometimes we lose up to 18% earning power. And if we stay out of the workforce 3 years, we can lose as much as 37%. So getting back on track can be a challenge. I don't want to say it's not doable because I've worked with a lot of women. The good news is I think women have badass second acts and third acts. So actually I think it's one place as women we actually have a competitive advantage over men, particularly as we age and mature and move into senior level roles as we grow a bit older. Again, salary gap, always in the news. We've made some strides, 80.5 cents of every dollar compared to men. 50% of women are breadwinners, and we're still doing about 2 to 3 times the amount of housework and 3 times the amount of child rearing. So we're still busy. The good news, though, and I want to, that, with everything, with every dark side comes a light side. And so our earning power continues to grow. We do have a lot of consumer buying power, and I think when we can leverage that more, we'll even have more power because women own 80% of consumer buying decisions in the U.S. and 65% worldwide. Companies, there's lots of research coming out that companies with female executives have higher return. There's studies coming out, one particular study in France showing the higher ratio of women in top management shows better resistance to the financial crisis, for example. Women typically score better than men in developing emotional intelligent behaviors, which is nearly 36 to 40% of a leader's success. And what's interesting as I'm coaching is as I coach men, I'm trying to coach oftentimes on the skills and competencies that I find are often already, and I can't generalize, but the kinds of skill sets for the higher form leaders I find that women are already bringing to the table. And so it's interesting as I'm coaching men to lead, I'm trying to build in more skill sets that are viewed as more traditionally female. And it's interesting because when I'm working with a lot of my emerging women leaders, we're looking at, some of the skill sets and other types of skill sets. So we're trying to get that balance between the two. That's why it's really so important that we get that good mix because we all bring unique and diverse things to the table. The other good news, I think we could really celebrate this year is 2018 was a banner year for women in politics. Obviously the election and more women in Congress than we've ever had. So there's been a real catalyst event, and it's good to see that we are making strides that hopefully will begin to bring some of these positive changes that we need. But looking at it from a macro perspective is one thing, but one of the things that I wanted to bring to the table is, from a coaching perspective, is what can I do with you as a female, as someone who's trying to build their own ability to lead, to have that impact, is really look at some of the behaviors that are holding women back. And so that's why, as I think about these production trap behaviors, there are kind of subtle things that I think that when we bring to light that we can begin to put coaching interventions and strategies in place that can really help women unleash their full potential. And so one of the things that I talk about is, we have a lot coming at us, but one of the things I want to introduce is Harriet Breaker's great work on what we call the Type E woman. You've heard of Type A, correct? Sarah, you've heard of Type A people?
Oh, yes. I know a lot of Type A women in the workplace, yes.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of a Type E woman?
I have not.
I know. Type E is some research that was done by Harriet Breker, where women are typically high-achieving women. Again, some of those type A behaviors that we would put forth, but actually it's women who want to excel at everything. And it can be any woman, any age, anyone who's juggling all these multiple roles and a desire to achieve. But it's most often, and here's the caveat, accompanied by a desire to please everyone or not wanting to disappoint. And the end result, or the bottom line, is they really overextend their time and resources and end up being more acquiescent to others' demands. So they don't seize control as much as they give control. And I think this is really important just to begin to think about the paradox that's in. I mean, the more that we take on, the more the type B woman demonstrates that she can do, and that feels good because we get accolades, we get feedback, and then the more people demand of us. And then we begin to realize that we might be taking on more than we can achieve, but it's really hard to say no oftentimes, or we are trying to prove ourselves, and so that begins to start a distress cycle, and we begin to realize our limitations, and that begins to create doubt, self-esteem. We wonder if we can do, if we can meet the expectations. Are we failing? Can we meet expectations? It begins to create a sense of inadequacy. And guess what? To fight that, we actually take on more to maintain because, to get out of it, we start digging into taking on more so we can prove we're capable. And it begins to put this cycle of devalue in place. And just to give you a perspective, and one of the things that's really interesting to me as I work with men and women, just in terms of really thinking about how we spend our time. Now, a type A person is very driven, very time urgent, competitive. They really look at, they're very achiever oriented. They want quantifiable measures of success. They are responsible. A type A person takes responsibility for their goals. They're going after it. And their success equals achievement in professional life. And it's interesting because if you look back at all the work that was done on type A, type B, then the studies, it was actually done on men and heart attacks. And so it wasn't really focused on women. And so Harriet Breker's great work talked about the type E woman. In contrast, is very driven and very committed, but their time is quite fragmented. They tend to be overscheduled. They're giving too much of themselves. And ladies, I would ask you to look at your calendars and begin to think about how you schedule your day. We'll talk a little bit about that just because every hour of every day tends to be scheduled. There's no room for fires of the day, no room, and it can really create a sense of craziness and a lot of rescheduling and scheduling. And it's interesting because as I look at the men I coach versus the women I coach, and I've been coaching for 15 years, and I can probably count on two hands how many times my male leaders cancel their coaching sessions, which is really fascinating to me. But a woman will cancel more often for a work commitment or put their professional development needs below the needs of the work or the delivery or other things. And so we really make ourselves second-class citizens. I just find it fascinating. And I once asked one of my busy CEOs, I'm like, why? I'm like, you're in the middle of a merger or this is going on. Why didn't you cancel today? And he's like, this is my development time, and it's important. And so it's interesting how men will prioritize their development over women. So just an interesting point of view. Also, just in terms of success, the bar is constantly getting raised. I mean, we don't have any milestones. It's like we don't stop and celebrate successes. We don't realize we just keep running one continuous race we seem to cannot win. And so it's really beginning to think about how we break it down into success markers, like what is a successful day, what is a successful week, etc. Because the minute we get someplace, the bar gets raised, so we can't ever be successful. If you ever asked a woman if she's successful, she'll say she's lucky. If you asked a man if he's successful, he'll tell you all the things he did to drive that success. And the other thing, too, is, men have a better or just seem to compartmentalize that achievement in professional life, whereas women, we want it all. We want achievement in our professional and personal life, and so our bars are very different. And so I begin to see that play out in terms of how we begin to think about time and taking on more. And I think just from a personal standpoint, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this when we talk about actions, but just in terms of it, I mean, Sheryl Sandberg talks a lot of this in her book, Lean In. As we're thinking about our time, we have to come to terms with the fact that everyone is not going to like us. We can't bat 1,000 on humans, and sometimes that's not us. We have to learn the art of the gracious no and mean it. We have to practice the art of conscious planning and collaboration. We have to carve out time for ourselves without conditioning it on finishing everything first or questing for perfection. And we really have to learn to recognize the physical and emotional signs when you're caught in this kind of mindset of more, doing more, more, more. Now, I'm going to go a little bit deeper and talk about it. And I love this quote from Linda Ellis because it's a great one, because I've learned that it is okay to say no with a strong tenacity, for even a large porous sponge reaches its capacity. And coming back to my start where I said, time's like an airline seat. When it goes, it flies. It's just coming to terms with our own limitations and what do we really want to do with that. So I asked you, just real quickly, to read these 5 key areas and think about, what is my mindset about work and producing and taking on, and just reflect, true or false. I must be highly accessible and take on as many projects to prove my worth and demonstrate value. Are you taking on more to prove yourself? If people see how hard I'm working, I will receive positive recognition and be more valued. If I work extra hours, take on more work, deliver more services, I will gain respect, prove my worth, and get more resources. My work will speak for itself, and producing quality work will ensure I receive recognition for my value. Being knowledgeable and technically competent in my work is more valuable to my growth. As you think about these 5 things, how do you perceive that pound of performance, that production that drives value? So just reflect for a minute. Recognize any behaviors, because it's interesting. If you think about your time and your accessibility as much like economics, the law of supply and demand, the more you circulate something, the price will go down. Think about it. If you have too much inventory, what do? You put it on sale. If a stock is flooding the market and there's too much of that stock, the price goes down. So Robert Greene wrote a great and most interesting book quite some time ago called 48 Laws of Power. And he talks about scarcity and accessibility. And as a leader or as a person, the more you are omnipresent, the more you typically devalue yourself and the more commonplace you appear. So sometimes we have these paradoxical behaviors which are actually hindering our ability to be successful. And I'll give you 3 examples. I'll take Jane, for example. Jane was a terrific up-and-coming chief marketing officer. And when she joined her firm, professional services firm, the good news is she was the most senior person. And, she negotiated very well and was very, very well positioned. But some nuances happened in terms of the course of the business, and some of the budget was trimmed, and some of the commitments that they had made to her were not, forthcoming. So they had to make some cuts and some changes. And over the year, Jane worked really, really hard, mobilized her team, and drove probably 4 to 5 times the results that department had ever seen. But at the end of the year, she was unpleasantly surprised when they brought in a new chief marketing officer. And what Jane had learned over the course of the year is that producing that value and getting those results had not left time for her to build important relationships within the firm. And while she had a couple of really good relationships, she hadn't built the kind of awareness and relationships with the partners that were allowing her to be seen and visible. And so she learned very quickly she could have probably produced 25 to 50% less, still been a stellar star student, and spent that time ensuring she was building the kind of relationships and partnerships in the business that would have allowed her to win. Now, since that time, obviously, I think we learn our lesson when we kind of get there, and she's become a chief marketing officer, and she's recognized that producing is only one aspect of being successful. It's about, delivering results, building on relationships and demonstrating leadership. So with that mind shift, obviously, she moved into a new role. And then unfortunately, she had to leave that firm and move on to another firm to get that particular role. Not everyone has to leave. I've got great cases where women have really gotten the awareness and begun to focus on how they become strategic and ask for the right resources and get it. But sometimes we learn those lessons and have to find new areas in which to test out our new behaviors. I will also talk about Christy, and I've got dozens of women that I've talked with that come to me and actually ask if they tell me that they need to work on their time management or they need to be more productive. Christy was fascinating to me because when she left her company because she felt she was overworked and wasn't getting the support she needed, they actually replaced her with 7 people. It was staggering that she was so capable and doing so much work within the organization that when she left, they actually hired 7 people to replace her. Ironically, when she left her next job, they replaced her with 3 people, and only after coaching and recalibrating was she getting it down to where she was actually taking on the right amount of work to become the leader that she was meant to be. And so you really begin to see that we're working really hard, but are we really getting to where we need? Because leadership is not about the production. It is also about the other, and we're going to talk a little bit about that when we talk about casting vision and the paradox that we're in, that working hard oftentimes is really just getting us nowhere fast. Erica was an interesting case because when she was getting ready for her promotion, she was in a thriving healthcare business, and she was ready for a promotion, and she loved her boss, and she did great work, and she was doing really great work, and she was up for promotion. And her boss said, let's work on a plan, and they did. And when she got there to the end of the year, she had achieved everything, and so she was so proud, and she was ready for her promotion, except when she got there, her boss said ultimately she couldn't promote her that year. And it was interesting because she said when she put her up for promotion, her boss and her boss's boss said, we really don't know that much about her. And so one of the things that she had done, she had put all her eggs in one basket and kind of stayed in her channel with her boss, and she hadn't built the kind of broad-based support that would make it easy for them to get the kind of promotion that she was ready for. So over the next year in coaching, we really worked on her strategic visibility and expanding up a level or 2. And so the next year, she was able to get that promotion. But it's really interesting because even if you're doing a great job, you have a great relationship with your boss, if your boss doesn't have power or they're not advocating on your behalf, sometimes you can miss the nuances of how these things and how this growth is being developed. So you got to make sure that you have the right advocates. And one of the things I always know is that if your boss, oftentimes, whether male or female, we say, hey, you're my successor and you're on the succession plan. But if your boss is not putting you in important meetings, if you're not able to get exposure, if you're not getting the kind of visibility that's expanding beyond kind of your one dimension or your area domain, then you're really not building the kind of influence and awareness that's going to help you really continue to grow as a leader. Because as you grow up and promote and get to positions of leadership, it's a much more expansive role. So how you're working those relationships and leveraging your relationships becomes very, very important. So as we think about that, I guess the question that I want to leave you with is, can working too hard or producing too much actually hinder your ability to be advanced, promoted, and or achieve next level goals? And I hope that with these examples that we can be aware that sometimes we are putting in way too much into our work, into producing, into proving ourselves, and actually paradoxically devaluing ourselves. And so just really think about that, because as you check in with your motivations and belief systems, as I've coached with women, this is probably one of the top 3 things that as I'm moving and working with women who want to be advanced, who want more career satisfaction, who are really trying to gel, kind of align this whole work-life career intersection, part of it is really rethinking about what we take on and why we take on certain things, because getting women right-sized is often a very important predecessor to really stepping up to new levels of leadership and creating that space to lead. So as you really check in, one of the things I encourage people to do is really what I call strategic recalibration. And that's introducing what I call the 50-25-25 rule. As you look at your week, and I'm guilty of this too. I mean, I always say, maybe we teach what we need to learn, but a number of years ago, and why this is really poignant for me and why I think it's an important issue is my business partner did a wonderful webinar on awareness, choice, and tenacity in terms of how aware we are of time. And I'm going to leave you with a little exercise to do at the end of today's session, but I did this exercise where, you had to really stop and be conscious of how you spent your week or wanted to spend your week. And so, time, motion, study, how many hours a day do I sleep? How many do I spend with work? How many do I spend driving to work? How much do I spend exercising? How much do I spend preparing dinner? How much do I spend working with clients? Like all these different elements. And I remember after the webinar was over, my partner said, "How did it go?" And I said, "I am totally depressed, totally depressed." She said, "Why?" I said, "Wow, I need 247 hours a week." And I realized, and that was a real awakening for me, that I was deluding myself, that I was really getting everything accomplished that I wanted to get accomplished. It was very sobering, and that put me back into coaching to really think through, how did I look at my weeks, my months, and my quarters, and my 6 months, because I was realizing that I was, if you really are conscious of it, you can begin to see. And my husband and I had a great time. We tried to figure out, if we took a picnic, walked the dog, picked up lunch or dinner, we could actually multitask 3 things. We made a big game out of it. But more importantly, it was very important for me, and what I encourage women to do is really think about consciously how we spend our time, what we want our days to look like, not in some rigid kind of rule-based environment, but just to really be conscious that sometimes we're just going through the motions, and we're not really being purposeful about where we're spending our time. So just that strategic recalibration. I call it the 50-25-25 rule because as you look at your calendar, 50% of your time is spent on actually doing work. 50%. So if you schedule time to work, and this is just a general guideline, 50% should be towards work, 25% should be towards relationships, and 25% should be towards fires of the day. Because a lot of people that I talk to, and this again is men and women, but in particular women, we schedule ourselves to 40 hours a week. So if we have a fire of the day, then everything we needed to do starts stacking up. And so how many of you are working in environments where you don't have a fire of the day almost every day? So fire of the days every day are really planned work. It's just you have to make sure you're putting time into your calendar. So even beginning to think about how we spend our week, take a minute and just think about, if you look at your average week, how much time are you spending in your work, producing work, delivering work? How much time are you spending in relationships? Relationships, not necessarily in the work, but relationships with your peers, relationships with your key stakeholders, relationships where you're developing, having broader leadership conversations, not actually producing work, but more focused on bigger picture relationships, power, and influence. And how much time are you spending on fires of the day? So just, in the chat group, just put in, what do you think your current ratio is? If you had to think about how much time I'm doing, how much time I'm kind of building relationships and connecting, and how much time am I serving on fires of the day? What do you think it is?
That is a fascinating question, Jodie.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine sometimes you should always be cognizant of this, but it's something you could bring up when you are starting a new role to ask. Maybe they want you to spend 80% of your week putting out fires, and that's why they created the role. So it's okay for this to change based on the role, as long as the expectations were set initially?
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. It's knowing and being conscious at it. I have a wonderful client that got into the production trap and actually left our firm and went to another firm. And when we onboard, I have an entire first 90 days, 120-day onboarding, because setting resource allocation is really one of the most strategic things you can do. And in this case, she came on and they had a job for her to do, but when she came in, she said, wow, you've got two big things that have to be fixed before I can do my job. Now, normally she would have come in and said, I'll do those and do my job, and she would have been burning both candles at both candles at both ends, and she'd have been worn out. But she said, I'm not even going to do my job until after I fix these two things. So went in, fixed these two things, highly focused, and we didn't even do her 90-day plan until her second 6 to 9 months, because they had two really important things, and she got agreement on that. So she wasn't trying to do two jobs. She came in as a firefighter, fixed some things, and then she worked on the more strategic things. So one of the things is just calibrating. I mean, we can't do it all at one time, and I think this is one of the most critical things about being a leader and being a strategic thinker and thinking about the resources is we don't have to do it all. I talk about the power of three. If you have more than three things to focus on, three priorities, there are productivity studies that say your productivity starts taking a nosedive. And so how you calibrate your schedule, how you calibrate your people, how you calibrate your resources, how you calibrate your workflow, it's just really important. I use this as a general guideline because mainly nobody puts any time in for the fires of the day. They have their whole day planned, and then the whole day goes to hell. And so I'm just saying you have to really be realistic in terms of what the environment is and what you need to do. So what are we seeing? Is anybody putting anything in the chat group or
So only I will reward this one bold person who did actually respond. So I hope everyone else is taking notes at their desk, and we'll show someone else later. But this person sounds like they're being very honest. 40% is on fires of the day, 10% on building relationships, and 50% on actually producing work.
Yeah. I mean, and there's no right or wrong. It's just during moments of time, there are certain quarters where you are really delivering a lot and relationships take a back burner. I was just talking with one of my female presidents overseas, and we were talking about, I said, you can't build all the relationships at one time while you're launching a new team and do everything. So sometimes it's calibrating. So this quarter's relationships are on team. Next quarter's relationships are on peers. And the quarter after that, she's going to start working on her broader stakeholders. So it's just being conscious that relationships are as important as the work you're doing, probably more so if you really want to move out of producer to a more recognized leader role, because leadership and those conversations are really what exhibit leadership. And so you can't really produce your way to the top. I mean, you can get to a certain level, but after a while, I always say look around and see, is the person that got promoted in your department, or are you aware of people that don't seem to work at all but yet seem to get those promotions? It's because they're spending more time on relationships and different kinds of conversations than they are producing the work.
Okay.
And it's also interesting, too. Go ahead.
Well, we have a few questions coming in, so I just want to make sure before you move on that we get to these. So lots of questions.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone. So which method works best for preventing burnout when you feel like you're above the 50% production ratio for a company?
Which works best when you're trying to avoid burnout?
Right. Yes. You feel like you're above. So they're above 50% for how much they're spending their time working on production, and they are worried about burning out.
Well, first thing I do is figure out if it's a stretch period, or, if it's 3 months, we can kind of work through it and barrel through it. But when 3 months becomes 6 months, 6 months becomes 9 months, 9 months becomes a year, 2 years, it's not really a stretch period anymore. So if we're approaching burnout, it's really having those pivotal conversations, or sometimes just pressing pause and stopping and thinking, what do I need to do to recalibrate it? And that may mean stopping to build a business case or talk with your boss about new resources. It may be reprioritizing. A lot of times it happens more in evolution than revolution. We added one more thing, we added one more thing, we added one more thing, and now the scale is tipped. And so a lot of times I work with women on strategic calibration. I think as I coach with women, I try and help them recognize the signs early so we don't get so on tilt. But I think when we're evolving as leaders, if we're not in coaching, if we're not thinking about these things, if we're not being conscious of it, it's easy to it's a slippery slope. And so I think it's about, and also what's tilting you in the work and what you might need also in personal resources, like sometimes I'll have to say, to my husband, hey, I need you to step up to take on more of the house and family because I'm teaching and traveling a lot this month. And so we horse trade like where we are. We have other resources that we have to bring in. So each woman is different. You have different support system, different resources, and you have to, sometimes get a partner just even to talk it out, because even the act of discussing it and organizing it can help you get some realistic perspective, kind of get context, and really set out what works for you. Because once you get to burnout, your brain starts shutting down. So when you're feeling it, the best time to do it is before you get into that place, because when you get into that burnout place, it's hard to get your mental energy to figure out what to do. And so we're under stress, then our brain shuts down, and then we kind of churn in mud. So just kind of the emotional intelligence rule is when our brain is overloaded, we don't work at our best. So find partners early. When you're sensing it climbing the slope, be aware of it. Don't ignore it. And make sure you're working it as it goes along, not waiting till it gets so bad, because then it gets even twice as hard sometimes, because our cognitive resources often fail us when we're burning out. And so it's the paradox. We kind of get really stuck. So that's when it's good to have a partner, a mentor, a support center, or somebody can say, hey, let me take a look at this and sound this out. So I think that hopefully that helps answer it. Any other questions, Sarah?
There are several questions. So we have someone here who is worried that she's not positioning herself correctly, and so wondering what exactly those strategic relationship building conversations look like.
Well, I look at, first of all, all of my clients have stakeholder plans, like what's the relationship I have with my boss, what my boss's boss, like who are the people we need to influence and why. A lot of people come in and say, I need to influence, I need to position myself. The question is to who? And so a lot of times we'll look at the power structure, like how are decisions being made, and who do we need to influence, and who do we need to connect with? And, it might be, 5 people, 10 key people. And so then the questions become, first of all, who do we need to influence? What's our relationship with them? How do we acquire a relationship with them? Are there natural business ways to do it, like working on projects or seeking guidance or content? It's really creating that learning connection with other people. I think it's figuring out what kind of relationship you need, why you need it, and then structuring kind of purposeful interventions or purposeful relationship strategies where you can begin to build relationships and connections with key people.
Okay, so the last question we'll offer you in this section is, we have someone here who would like to strategically recalibrate. She is feeling burnt out, but does not have a supervisor who is supportive, and she feels like she has to defend all of her work rather than having someone support what she's doing. So when you're at that point and then you're burnt out, so as you said, you don't even feel like you have the energy to make decisions or apply for other jobs, what do you do?
Well, I find somebody you can connect with. It might be somebody else in the organization. Sometimes I seek lateral mentors or people in other groups. Find a leader or a peer or a partner that kind of understands the situation, helps you talk you through it. Sometimes if you don't have a supportive boss, and defend it, the question is, are there other gentle conversations you can have to win support in other ways? You don't want to undermine your boss or tap that in a way that can put you in greater challenge, create more challenges. But the first thing I always say is work on you with you and try and figure out what you need, and then develop your own strategy. And so what can you accept? What can you change? And ultimately, if you're not getting the kind of support you need, then you might have to recalibrate, cut back a little bit, and create that space to make a move and a maneuver, because, you get kind of stuck in that sand pit of, I don't have the energy to move out, I don't have the energy to stay. So that's a hard place to be in, because it's almost like, not in a clinical sense, but you're almost in that depressed state where I can't move forward, I can't move, and so we get stuck. So finding a good accountability partner or a good sounding board partner becomes an optimistic support system. We can all make change. And change doesn't always have to be big change. It doesn't always mean you have to leave your company if it's a size company, or there's other types of roles or other things you can do. I've had lots of people successfully move within their organization or strategize on different ways that they can approach their work. So sometimes it's just getting a partner that can help you see maybe there's some new paths you haven't you might be in a pattern with your boss in terms of defending your work, and there might be some influencing strategies. Like maybe there's certain triggers with your boss that you can look at and see if there's another way, and experiment with some new behaviors to see if maybe you can win that person over in a different way. So just having someone be a sounding board partner can be very helpful, because if we're doing it on our own, sometimes we just can't see all the different options. So having a good mentor or peer colleague that could say, hey, let me take a look at this and see if there might be a way I can gain my boss's support, or is there a way I can frame it where she could hear it versus triggering this pattern of her not supporting me or him supporting me. I don't know if it's him or her. And then also, practicing pivotal conversation. Is this a boss safe and unevolved? If they're unevolved and they just don't listen, that's one thing. If they're punitive, that's another thing. So we just have to look at different strategies for different people and what the environment is like. So it's really, like I said, but the 50-25-25 is just a way to begin to think about, am I right producing, and how do others see you? Do they see you as a producer, a manager, or a leader? Because if you are heads down, if you're at your desk, if you are really cranking out the work, they're going to see you as a producer and not necessarily, they're going to enjoy your good work. And I've even seen people held back. I mean, I had one great case at a major airline, which shall go nameless, and her boss loved her work. And she got stuck for 2 years because she realized her mentor and sponsors had retired after a period of time, and she didn't have kind of that higher level support. And her boss talked a good game. He said, we're going to get you taken care of. He paid her handsomely, but we found out that he was holding her back because she was such a great producer. She made him look fantastic, and he wouldn't let her go. And so she would go interview for new roles, and she wouldn't get them. And she's like, am I doing something wrong? And I said, I don't know. Something smells wrong. And so we did a little recon and found out he was putting her up for promotion, but he was saying behind the scenes, don't take her. And he had some political clout. And so people didn't want to make an enemy of him. So they didn't. And so fortunately, she was able to build some new relationships, and there was a female leader that said, I'm not afraid of taking him on, and come over to my group. And so then she moved on and began to build her career. But sometimes producing can, sometimes bosses want to keep us down because we serve them and we do it well, and it's almost too well. And so as women, I think we just have to be aware that there's a lot of shenanigans in the workplace. There's a lot of shenanigans in the workplace for men and women these days, and we just have to be conscious that, we have to just be aware and be smart and think about what we need, and, work with, mentors, sponsors, coaches to continue to grow and develop when we're not getting what we need. So just being aware that people are drawing perceptions about us, and that heads down mentality often can keep us from being advanced. So again, just really thinking about the time you spend. And I kind of look at it like, what can you do? Like awareness, choice, and tenacity. This comes from Dr. Stephen Brock. He was formerly a professor at the business college at Kennesaw. He was talking about, first of all, I think as women, we just need to be aware. We're so busy sometimes, and we read the headlines and we go back to work. We're so busy, we're not aware of what's really happening. So I think we have to increase our knowledge, whether it's, bias in the workplace, or whether it's really strengthening our identity as leaders, or, forming critical relationships, or spending time thinking about how we're influencing. I mean, these are all normal things that leaders have to think about. And when we get caught in the production trap, we don't have time to read and connect and really think about it. So just staying smart and vigilant and aware of what's happening for women, and how we're continuing to kind of beat the odds, and what we can do as society and organizations continue to evolve and change. What can we do to kind of continue to push that envelope? And are we making really conscious choices and being intentional? Because myself included, if I am not conscious and intentional about doing something, I'll float away and not do it, because we're only accountable if it's visible and we have an accountability partner. Because it's just, the world is so busy and distracting, and there's always something, whether it's kids, family, more work, the neighbors, the weather. I mean, there's always something that's pulling at our attention. practically and not practically. And so it's just really being conscious about what we want and being intentional and responsible to really think about the choices we're making. And then are we really putting in the pieces that are going to support and challenge that to be sustained? I mean, if we're putting a plan in place to really think about how we're going forward, the tenacity piece, we make goals, we put it together, but at the end of the day, if we're not putting our accountability in place with partners to make it visible, how do we sustain it? Because there's always something that's going to pull us away. And my mentor told me, 20 plus years ago, you can always get more of what you don't want. And so it's always stuck with me that, as humans, there's this paradox that we keep pulling in more that's keeping us from what we truly want, whether it's more work, more distractions, more ever. And we just really have to, be intentional and be conscious and share it with someone, whether it's a coach, whether it's a mentor, whether it's a partner, whether it's a women's lean in group, whether it's anything. I find that women's peer groups are some of the most, just having a women's peer group can raise visibility and awareness tremendously. An hour a month. Just to kind of talk through and be accountable to someone regarding the things you really want to do in your career, your life, your business, your family, whatever it is. Finding that right support group that can help you be accountable. So just thinking about that, and I've got a couple of different things I want to bring in. First of all, I think there are three things. When you are caught in the production trap, it's not always about just you, but I always start with you. Like, what's within our control, and how do we begin to think about it? Boundaries and skill sets to seize control, kind of pressing pause to move from reactive to proactive, because we get so busy we don't stop and press pause, and then we're on tilt, and then we're burned out. And so it's really, whether you have to force 2 days in the middle of your month just to stop, catch up, calibrate, figure out where you are. I mean, the hardest part is just keep going. We're just running until we're flat as a pancake. Really always evaluating workflow and priorities. This is not a one and done thing. I mean, I do it every month with my coach. I do it, I practice the 12-week work year. I'm always putting in now those checkpoints to make sure, am I working on the right things? Are priorities shifting? Clarity of direction, planning, negotiation, and obviously the gracious no. I mean, this year I said no to 2 big things. It was really, really hard. I sought a coaching session because they were really great opportunities, but I've made a commitment to myself for some projects that I want to complete this year. And I knew if I got distracted and did it, and so I said, if they're available next year, that's great. And if they're not, I'm okay with that. But sometimes you've got to really say no and mean it. And so learning the art of what I'll say yes to. I mean, every year I start out my coaching sessions of the years, what are you saying no to this year? Because we're always saying yes. And I don't know anybody that's certainly not coming to coaching that has more time on their hands. So it's really thinking about what you say yes to and what you say no to. The other thing is about boss relationship. If you don't have a good supportive boss, that may be bigger than you. I mean, you can be a great worker and do all this great planning, but if you have a boss that's not necessarily supportive, then it may be something to do with you and your boss, and you really have to evaluate that relationships and getting that clarity of direction. And do you have a good boss or a difficult boss? Because sometimes maybe you haven't influenced the boss and it's not the boss, but maybe they're not hearing you in a way, or you're not speaking in their language. So sometimes we just have to have different kinds of conversations with our boss to influence more effectively. How are we bringing solutions? How are we holding the boss to be accountable when they're putting things on us that we can't deliver? And when you're falling on deaf ears, how do you build allies around that so you can, get people to help? Client was overworked and her boss was not open to additional resources. So she sat down with HR and just said, hey, I don't need you to fight my battles. I just need a strategy. And they developed a couple of really creative strategies on how she could get more resources without raising the budget. Her HR partner was very helpful in that. And so they took part of a budget and put a contractor on. It really helped her get the kind of resources that were going to help her start being more strategic. And sometimes if you got a bad boss, you have to try and figure out if the problem is you. And I would say you got to do your self-exploration work, because it's easy to say my boss is to blame, but sometimes we have to do our inner work to realize that maybe we're not asking for it, maybe we're not building the case, maybe, let's do what we can do and then look at the boss. And the third really is company culture. Assess your needs, and if it's a fit, is this a snapshot in time or embedded in the culture? You got to get to a place of power to drive change within your domain. And it's interesting because some cultures are just really sweatshop cultures. I know that I always say going to like a company like GE, it's very fast paced, the train's rolling. When you come into some of those cultures, it's going to be great learning, but it's a very fast paced, kind of environment that, the train's rolling and you roll, drop and roll when you get on and you drop and roll when you come in. So, you got to think about what the environment is like, and is it really lining up to what you need. And if it's not, then you don't have to quit your job, but you can plan for a smart exit, because culture plays a huge part of satisfaction, and really think about where you need to be and what's working. And just really have that reality check, to really think about reflecting and rethinking about your strategy, about how you want to work, if you want to seize control of your career, become more relevant in your organization. And the good news is you may even get to work less and have a life, because when we get out of this production trap mentality, and I've got case after case after case where we've, over time, reduced people's work, commitment to work, not taking on things with the resources. It's, like I said, for women to get up to lead, we got to give up some work, and we got to let go of some things, and we got to realize that we're not there to save a system or a company. And just because somebody doesn't do it doesn't mean you have to do it. And so it's really something that we need to be conscious of. Before I go into kind of my closing exercise, Sarah, I'd love to, I know we got a few more minutes, a couple of questions that we had from the group that we wanted to answer before we signed off, and then I'll assign a homework assignment.
Absolutely. Okay, so one here, how can I advocate for myself and mitigate additional burnout when I'm someone who likes to work hard? So basically, going back to that E-type, just what do you do to kind of have an intervention with yourself?
Well, first of all, I think it's having an intervention itself is really talking with someone about what it's going to take for you to be a leader. Like, as we think about, I use a model called the leadership agility, and am I in expert mode, achiever mode, or catalyst mode? And leadership is not about producing. I like to work hard too. I work hard every day, but are we working hard on the right things? And so production feels good. Like, we're producing stuff. It feels good. It's like a drug. But I think it's realizing, and I think it's that mindset shift, that are we right producing? And so, making sure we're putting in that reflective time and making sure we're taking time, because that's what leadership is about. It's not just the doing, it's really producing and producing well. And for some people that are used to driving and hard work and, a fast-paced, production-centric environment may be good for you. But to really get up and lead, you got to get up to another level of the balcony. And so it's starting with, thinking about, how do I want to be viewed? Do I want to be a producer? If you do, own it, produce great work. If you want to manage and lead, then you're going to have to think about how you work differently. And that's just a rite of passage that we all have to go through.
Okay. And I know, Jodie, a lot of your work has focused on coaching women in the mid-career levels who want to move up to the senior leadership. So we have someone here who is a working mother, and she wants to make that move up to senior leadership. What's your advice for her?
I think studies show moms make great leaders. Leadership starts at home, and how we manage our kids and our households and the all thing. Actually, there's some great work, I think, through the Lean In organization that's really looking at it. Moms make great. It's just really determining as everything else. It's setting priorities and understanding how you want to work and design it, and you can move ahead and I do believe you can be a leader and have a family. It's proven. So it's just figuring out what you need and how you need it, and, what you're stepping into and what you can step out of. I was just talking with one of my clients, and she had she was really stressed out. She just had her second baby, and we were talking to, she coaches every month. And she was really stressing out because she's got clear boundaries, and they offered her a promotion, and she's like, I would love to have the promotion, and I think I'm capable, but, with the new baby, are you going to be okay? I have some boundaries. Like, no, we're going to work with you. But it really stressed her out. And for 3 months, we had a conversation about how worried she was going to leave work at 5 o'clock. Now, it hadn't happened yet, by the way, but it's the stress that she had to pick up her daughter at daycare because her husband's on a travel assignment right now, and so she's primary pickup. And so one of the things I said is expand your support systems. And so within a month, she had not just one support system, but 7 layers deep. That if for any reason the CFO came in and needed her, she wouldn't have to say no. Bottom line is, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, she had something in place. But it was so worrying her that she couldn't deliver on that and deliver on her work. It was stressing her out. And she was like, should I have a conversation? I'm like, no, it hadn't happened. Let it play out. But make sure you have some support systems. If it happens multiple times, then we can do it. But if it's the occasional, how do we make sure you have the support systems? I always laugh. We have a second husband and wife. Our friends Dave and Leslie are, I call them my second husband or second wife, because, they can't get me and they can't get my husband, then they call them. I mean, you build support systems, hopefully, that can really help you, whether it's family, friends, community. We have more capability that I think we have to do it all ourselves, but community and tribes are really important. I mean, it's funny where survival was based on clans and tribes and support systems, and yet somehow we've forgotten that. So I think you can absolutely grow. It's just figuring out what you can and can't do during periods of time and what works for you.
That is a great point, Jodie. That's a very great point. And so, is that what you would say to someone else who asked a question, who's a mother of a new toddler and trying to create that time for professional development? So, is it the same thing? Then you need to build in a support system who can allow you to carve out that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, new toddlers. I mean, I was a terrible stay-at-home mom. I probably lasted 4 days because I had this dream that I was going to be able to do calls when the baby was sleeping, but the baby always wanted to be awake when I had a call. So I realized that my idealized version of a working at home was not going to work out. So I think it's just, I think it's periods of time and knowing you have the right resources and support resources and what's important to you, when you go to work, how you work, what time you want to spend with your family. I have many moms that, are home by, they leave by 3 or 4 and they're back on by 7 doing some email and doing some other things. They work in more flexible environments that work for their life and family. I think we are going to have to move in that direction. I mean, for some women, that's a mission critical element of, flexibility, not just for women these days. It's men and women. I mean, flexibility is becoming much more important for people because it's just getting harder and harder with everything we're trying to manage. So toddler or teen, all families have needs, and it's just really, again, looking to design and figure out, and it's not even making excuses or even telling your boss, oh, I've got to be out or do this or whatever. It's just negotiating, for what you need and what you want in a given, and, is it a family-centric culture? It's interesting because the president that I'm working with job shared for 10 years, and she's president of a major pharmaceutical company, and, she took a strategic job where she job shared with another mom, and they critically, did critical work. They just did half of it. So, and it's not just women. I mean, I'm seeing more men wanting to, I have a client that repositioned his entire career because he wanted to be there to pick up his kids when they got off the bus at 3 o'clock. So his job in technology, was really designed with that in mind because he had some family goals. And, I even look at my own career as a coach. I wanted something that was portable, that would allow me to travel with my kids. And, your goals in life have to be aligned. You have to be strategic, and you don't get it all at one time, but I always think if you can figure out what you need and want and wish for in your life, you can really begin to put things in place to help you get closer and closer and closer to it. But I'm always surprised, how we're working away, and we aren't even really working away on things that are getting us closer to things that we need and want in our life. They feel like wishful thinking when in fact, if we are conscious of it and we're intentional about it, it may take us 6 months, it may take us a year, it may take us 5 years. Whatever it's working towards, but we should always be working towards more of what we need and less of what we don't need. So, do we have time for one more question, Sarah?
We are all set with the questions. I was just going to remind everyone about your next session on Wednesday, February 20th, where you will talk about overcoming the double bind with power and grace.
I want to kind of close with this little exercise that I want you to think about, but it really is reflecting on your time. Just really thinking about, and I'll send this out afterwards to the group, just to really think about the role you're playing, the activity. Do that 168, or I tend to do mine over a month because a weekly can kind of be really challenging sometimes, but I do my time analysis over a month and over 3 months just because it works better for me. But just really be conscious of where you spend your time and where you want to spend your time, and what behaviors can you recognize that may be driving down your stock, and what steps can you take in getting out of the production trap. And the first is really just realizing that you got to get out of it, and that it's a conscious effort to really calibrate to get your career and life on your own terms. And if you're going to lead, you got to create space to lead. So getting out of the business trap is the the biggest kind of leap up to make sure you're creating space to lead. And what resources do you need to achieve that goals? Is it more support systems? Is it more, is it mentors? Is it coaches? Who needs to be on that board of advisors that's going to help you keep growing and evolving on that path to be whatever you wanted it to be? And so, as Sarah said, we're going to do a couple of series that are going to play into this. And then if you want to get connected, please join me. I am starting a Facebook group this year just for private conversation with women. It's at Facebook groups, Coaching Women to Lead, LinkedIn, or even join me for a virtual coffee. If you're thinking about how to get out of the production trap, please use your Emory coaching session to set up some time and really think about, because I believe women make extraordinary leaders, and we have got to fight the good fight to be one. But the first thing we got to do is fight the fight to get the time that we need to be the leaders we can be. So really appreciate being here today, and look forward to seeing you. Also, I am teaching a class at UGA on all about leadership in the March to June cohort, and that's at Terry's Executive Education, which is going to go through all of this in a 5 or 6 day class where we're going to work to help build leadership capacity focused on production trap and relationship and influence. So I really appreciate you being here today, and I hope that you've taken away a nugget. And Sarah, I'll send out the in the little homework exercise so we can send it out so people can begin to reflect on where they are.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, Jodie, thank you so much for sharing this wisdom today. Lots of good reminders, like figuring out what we cannot change, what we can, creating a tribe. So I will send out the link to the recording so you can review all of this information again while you complete that homework, and join us for the rest of this series. And if you are in Washington, D.C. on April 5th, we'll be bringing an Alumni Leadership Circle event to you there. We'll also be visiting San Francisco, Atlanta, New York. So stay tuned for that, and reach out to me if you have any questions about the Alumni Leadership Circle or the coaching benefits available to you. Everyone have a wonderful rest of the day and stay warm. Jodie, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, group.